Pod Apostle. Help us build the kingdom. Like, share, and subscribe. Hello and good day from beautiful Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. Praise be Jesus Christ. Always be praised, and Hail Mary. Coming to you from Our Lady of the Gulf Catholic Church and on our YouTube channel and Radio Maria. Truly a privilege to spend some time with you this morning. Recently I read a book. It's always maybe a little bit dangerous when I read a book because when I read a book, it occupies a place in my thinking for a little while. And a few years ago, when I first realized that I needed some personal education, that I had to take charge of like where I am in my life, maturing and educating, particularly right after college. Well, I went through a time where I just read whatever. And then I realized that I'm letting these books influence me. And I went to read a book one day that I knew it was gonna have an impact on me, or I suspected that it would. And so I prayed. With some fervor. Lord, do not let me be deceived. Do not let me be duped by what I'm going to be reading. And, you might think, well, how could you possibly think that would have been a bad book? But the name of the book I was thinking of particularly was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And when I read it, it did have an influence on me, and I think it had a positive influence on me. And one of the things that it did was it told me to look backwards. It told me to look backwards to a time maybe in history when the get-rich-quick scheme was less popular, if you will, than it had become by the time that book was written. And he recommended, the path of virtue. And he particularly recommended Ben Franklin's autobiography. I remember that. And I remember kind of that launching on that influence. So I read a book recently, and it's kind of affected my thinking. And I'm asking myself over and over again, is this an appropriate effect on my thinking, or do I need to kind of take a step back and do some fact checking and double checking and look into it a little more deeply? One of the things that happened in our world, in the 1960s, and again, I wasn't alive to experience the 1960s or the 1950s or the post-war time and the rise of kind of this trust in technology and the kind of cultural waves that came over the United States. I grew up in the after effect of those things, but I heard this enough. Don't trust anybody over 30. That was kind of a motto, I think, in like somehow people that were born, before 1930 couldn't be trusted somehow, or ideas or principles. We need everything that is new. And, and I think that idea, well, we've got all this technology and we've got all this new discoveries and we have all this stuff. And I think, unfortunately, with that openness, a lot of people have fallen under the sway of lies. And, and the book that I read had to do with falling under the sway of lies. G.K. Chesterton, who was a man that had some influence on me, he talked about, looking to the past, looking to how people lived and how people understood the world and how people understood themselves as the democracy of the dead. Okay, that if we give the people that have lived before us a vote in things, maybe we would be slower to adopt new things. I think one of his most famous lines that G.K. Chesterton said was, "Don't move a fence until you know why that fence was put there." If you happen upon a fence in a field and you say, I'm just going to move this. Well, if you don't have any idea what it's doing there. And I think we moved some fences, and maybe we did so in a way that was maybe problematic to some degree. And again, some lies kind of found their way in. We have to be people, and I speak to anybody that could be listening, but particularly Catholic, Christian people. We have to be people that have this understanding of the world that is underpinned by truth. That Jesus says, I am the truth. and the truth can be known, and that we have a responsibility to know the truth. And as I say those words to you, we have a responsibility to know the truth. So we also have a responsibility to be wary of the fact that there is a liar, that we have an enemy who lies. And when I hear things that I know at times are lies, it's a bit discouraging, because it's, the devil doesn't have to play fair. And especially when the devil comes dressed as a, quote, angel of light, which is something that I think St. Paul warns us, that Satan will disguise himself as a teller of the truth. So my whole point this morning is going to be that we have to be sensitive to the reality that we live in a world where Satan has a voice, and that voice lies, and that we have to be aware of the fact that we can fall under the sway of lies. But if we have an understanding of the world where the truth can be known, what I heard it described as one time, and I'm not sure who first described it this way, but I love this description. The truth is like a symphony, and it is all of these musical instruments that play. And then a symphony has this great balance, and it moves in a particular direction, and the different instruments are playing in harmony with one another. And that's how the truth is. And if we begin to train ourselves to understand the nature of truth as a symphony, we can be more aware of the fact that, be more sensitive to a lie when someone tries to tell us one. All right, so Jesus talked about the devil, saying, it is the devil's nature to lie. Quote, and this is from the English Standard Version, he, Satan, was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. End of quote. That's from John chapter 8. The apostles tell us also that our enemy is a great deceiver. When Ananias made a shady donation to Peter, Peter asked him, "How is that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit?" Again, end of quote, because Ananias gave a donation, and he purported it to be a full measure, a full amount, and Satan said, and Peter understood that he was lying in giving the donation. So lying, we have to be sensitive to lies. We have to be aware of lies. Who is Satan? He is our accuser. He is our adversary. He is our opponent. He is a liar. And God commands us to be people who tell the truth. We must have a love for the truth. We must hear the commandment that says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. We must hear the commandment that says, you shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. We hear in the Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, teaching us about wisdom, that a lying tongue and a false witness are among the things that the Lord hates. And, St. Paul teaches us to put away lying and tell the truth. So a commitment to be people that tell the truth. Now, what about this book that I read? And again, I can't recommend this book absolutely, but I can say that as I read it and as I looked into it, it kind of resonated with me and a little bit of life experiences that I've had. And the name of the book is Lies My Doctor Told Me. Okay, now it's written by a medical doctor, and he spends the first couple of chapters explaining that he's not talking about malicious lies. And he thinks that most people, the vast majority of people in the medical profession, would not deliberately lie to anybody. But he goes on to say that the way he was trained, his understanding of modern treatment of disease was influenced by lies, and that he believed some of those lies and that he passed some of those lies on, and that affected the way he treated his patients, and he was concerned that ultimately it affected the way that those treatments responded to the medical advice that he had given them. And one of the things that he talks about is this. One of the examples that he talks about is this. He says that you know it was a given. It was an absolute 100%. Everybody knew this, and now everybody knows it, that eggs are bad for you. Okay, that they're bad for you. Okay, that you should really limit your consumption of eggs. And if you do eat eggs, you should separate the yolks out of the eggs, and you can just eat the whites, because that egg yolk is bad. And, and where did that medical nutritional advice come from? And it was born out of the idea that if you eat things that have cholesterol, your cholesterol will go up. And if your cholesterol goes up, then that is bad. And well, it turns out that, that cholesterol in your diet actually has very little influence on your blood cholesterol. Okay, that's one thing. So you can eat cholesterol, and granted, it's not absolute. It's not 100%. I'm not giving medical advice here, but what I'm saying is I was raised under the idea that you should limit the number of eggs you eat. I think my mom and my dad, trying to make us healthy kids, told us not to eat too many eggs. And so we didn't eat too many eggs. We ate breakfast cereal instead. That's what we ate a lot of, breakfast cereal. But so in the 1960s, I was born in the 1960s, the American Heart Association said no more than 3 eggs a week. And then in the 1970s and the 1980s, the recommendation was to strictly limit or avoid eggs altogether. Okay, and this great deal of negative press about this. Into the 1990s, still generally advised to limit eggs, but this kind of orthodoxy started to be questioned in the 1990s. In the 2000s, moderate eating of eggs was acceptable if you were healthy. Into 2010s, this is 15 years ago now, eggs are part of a healthy diet. And specific cholesterol limits on your daily diet were dropped. Into the 2020s, healthy individuals can eat basically all the eggs they want as part of a healthy diet. Okay, but if I asked people around a breakfast table and said, can you eat eggs? Is eggs good for you? I would get one answer that said, oh, yeah, eggs are fine. I get another answer that says, well, I don't know. And the other answer says, oh, I think they're bad for you. Because that, according to Dr. Berry, that lie has been so propagated into our society. Now, was it a lie? Did somebody sit in their room, rubbing their hands together, laughing with their, kind of diabolical laugh and say, I'm going to put this information out there? No, I don't think it was that kind of lie. Now, are there those kind of lies in the world? There are. Absolutely 100%. But more often than not, there is a bit of miscommunication. There's a bit of misinformation. Maybe, and this is where the real challenge of some of the research into kind of medical orthodoxy, especially about nutrition, starts to be where Dr. Berry talks about lies. And I'm using this as a specific example. I'm going to launch from the book that I read into kind of more generic understanding of being a people of the truth, striving to know the truth, striving to understand how it all fits together. But yes, there could be people who begin research programs with a conclusion in mind. So we are going to do this medical research, or we're going to do this nutritional research, and it's going to be funded by, let's say, an organization that is anti, like PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. All right, they're funding this, as well as, let's say, the soybean growers of America. If you get those two funding research, and the question is eating animal meat healthy? What do you think the conclusion is going to be? Okay, and the conclusion is very likely going to lean in the direction of their preconceived wants. Now, are they lying absolutely deliberately? Maybe, maybe not, but they're under the influence of their whole worldview. I'm thinking about this whole, like, should you eat more carbs or should you eat more meat, and who says and why? So I was listening to an interview with a lady who was a nutritionist. Again, she's asked the question, would you consider like a keto diet or even a carnivore diet? And she just kind of rolled her eyes and said, that's just the most ridiculous thing ever. No, it's proven over and over again that that kind of diet is bad for you. And then after she said those two things, she said, and what about all the animals? What about the animals? And when she said that, I thought, no, that doesn't have a place in this conversation. Your treatment, your concern about how the animals are treated doesn't answer the question, is this diet good for you or bad for you? And so Dr. Berry, exploring, what is the medical orthodoxy and how did we get our medical orthodoxy and who's told a lie and who's believed it. And now I'm going to, again, a little reflection on my own personal life here is, when I was a kid, we ate margarine, probably because margarine was cheaper than butter. But there were 5 kids, but we ate margarine. And I remember, I went somewhere at a friend's house and, they had butter. And I was like, man, that's good. That is so good. And I was like, Bob, you lied to me. You said this was butter and I had real butter. And I'm saying that as kind of a joke. But, I remember the first time it kind of dawned on me that butter tastes so good. And, and I was like, then I found out, it's because butter's bad for you. Butter's bad for you and margarine is good for you. Well, guess what they have discovered now? They have discovered that margarine, especially when it had the trans fats or hydrogenated fats, was really, really like the worst thing you could eat almost. So I spent my, the 70s and the 80s eating the worst thing I could eat and not tasting as good because I thought it was better for me. And again, was that a lie? Was that like a malicious, lie? I don't think so, but it kind of plays back into the idea that we live in a world where morally people lie. Financially, people lie. People lie for their own interest. People lie to, I was talking to somebody who bought a house recently and the house inspector did not inspect the house like they should have. And they bought the house and they moved into the house and the termites were discovered in the house. And, it was given a clean bill of health and that was a lie. And, so we live in this world and my brothers and sisters, we have to be people who love the truth. I know this isn't anything, earth-shattering, but what's earth-shattering perhaps is that how lies have become part of the fabric of our culture. I want to tell you about a book that I read. I didn't read this book. I just got a little insight into this book the other day. And the name of the book was The People of the Lie. It was written by a psychologist named M. Scott Peck, most famous for the book The Road Less Traveled. And The Road Less Traveled is a book that has some problems. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, it calls us to recognize what path that we are following and not to follow the path of the herd just because the herd is going that way. Sometimes the herd is believing lies. Well, he wrote another book called The People of the Lie that I mentioned a moment ago. So his most famous book, The Road Less Traveled, and then he writes another book, The People of the Lie. He was a psychiatrist, I believe, a medical doctor who treated people who were having difficulty dealing with reality or dealing with emotional problems or whatever it might be. And he said that he observed that some people had given themselves over so much to lies that their whole worldview was founded on lies, that he could not help them, that they had an understanding of themselves or reality that was contrary to objective fact, but that they had embraced, and that he was unable to help them. And when I heard that, I thought of being possessed. What does it mean to be possessed? And I think we can get into the whole sort of like exorcist movie mindset of being possessed, and then we can understand that Satan is a liar and a murderer. And when he sows his lies into our souls so deeply that we believe lies and that our whole worldview is through the lens of a lie, is that being possessed? I would say in some respects it is. It is. And so what we have to do is we have to be on guard against lies in whatever form, whether we would be willing to tell them or willing to believe them. Again, I'm going to summarize one of Jordan Peterson's 12 rules for life. Again, I've referred to him a couple of times. But he says in one of his chapters, of one of his rules is tell the truth. At least don't lie. And he highlights the fact that, again, telling the truth is challenging because you have to know the truth to tell the truth. Now, and when you talk about whether eggs are good for you or bad for you, you got to know the truth about that. And where do you find the truth? That can be quite challenging for a lay person. But we have to kind of begin to be able to see a pattern of things, and we have to listen to the voices of history. We have to kind of look at how healthy people were and who had how much heart disease and when, and those kinds of putting our thinking cap on as we hear things, and not be skeptical about every single thing that we ever hear, but at the same time having a kind of healthy skepticism that's looking to fit things into that symphony of truth. So Dr. Peterson talks about the danger of lies, even small lies, seemingly harmless white lies or lies of omission accumulate over time, and they warp our sense of reality, and they make us less capable of handling adversity and dealing with difficult truths when we have to speak them. If we put ourselves into a habit of just lying when it is convenient for us, then when it's time to tell the truth, it may become very difficult. Back to the concept of this life lie that M. Scott Peck had recognized in some of his psychiatric patients, that they had embraced a kind of life lie, that they organized their life around a lie or a set of beliefs or an ideology that makes accepting the truth uncomfortable. And I don't want to pick on people. God knows that from the bottom of my heart, I truly do not. But I do think that the whole kind of explosion in transgenderism is a kind of believed lie that somehow that your biology is wrong and what you just think is right, and there's this subculture groups, and there's this explosion in the number of people with that condition or dealing with that psychological challenge comes from, I think, a tremendous amount of lies that have been told about sexuality and about biology on the internet, and with very little accountability. And so that's where the whole kind of symphony of truth and a biblical Christian worldview can help kind of lead us through, navigate through a world of lies. And truth, when Jesus says he is the truth, when Jesus says he is the truth, then we have this reverence for the truth. We reverence the truth as something noble and good and holy and beautiful. The truth. And whether we're a researcher, whether I'm a preacher, whether I'm a teacher, whether I'm just telling fishing stories, to reverence the truth and to love it. The truth is part of the meaning of life. And that I'll just kind of go all the way back to the book that I read and the hope that when you read a book or you listen to a sermon or you hear a kind of a religious ideology or a religious doctrine or whatever it might be, that it can go into a filter that has the capacity to measure it against truth. And, it is, I won't say we're living in a moment of critical failure, but this is going to sound political, but it's not, I promise you. When we look at the fact that people could build their political ideology or their political aspirations around a denial that Joe Biden was suffering from dementia, and live under the weight of that lie, and speak that lie that he was sharp, that he was mentally capable, that he has never been sharper than he is now. And I think now, a year removed from that or whatever it is, more and more people are kind of waking up to the fact that they believed a lie. I mean, even people that are inclined to support Joe Biden's presidential aspirations kind of have woken up to the fact that for one reason or another they believed a lie. My brothers and sisters, it can happen to anybody. We can't, the moment you think I can't fall under the sway of, that's when the con man's got you. That's when the liar and the deceiver's got you. What we have to do is we have to say, Lord, help me. Lord, show me the light. Lord, give me truth. Make me a student of the truth. Make me a lover of the truth. And Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. And you pray and you seek and you knock and you ask and you sacrifice and you're willing to, look into the face of the difficult truths, even the truths that call you to change your life, then you have every right to hear Jesus say, do not be afraid. I will not leave you orphaned. So, my brothers and sisters, we must be men and women of the truth, and we live in a world of lies. And when you read a book or you hear a sermon, pray. Pray to the good God. Pray to the Holy Spirit. Lead me into the truth. Praise be Jesus Christ. Always be praised. And Hail Mary.